In the quiet, forgotten corners of rural Illinois, just past the sleepy town of Elmswood, stood an old, weathered farmhouse. Time had been particularly harsh to this place, its walls sagging under the weight of years and neglect. The once grand structure, a symbol of an earlier era, had been abandoned for decades. Ivy clung to its sides like a veil, masking its decaying exterior, and the overgrown yard, once meticulously cared for, was now a wild tangle of weeds and thorns. This house, which had once been a lively home filled with the laughter of children and the aroma of fresh meals, had long since surrendered to time. Its windows were boarded up, and the roof, with a few missing shingles, offered no shelter from the relentless march of decay. Yet, for all its desolation, the house had a certain eerie charm that seemed to draw in those who passed by, curious perhaps, but mostly those who were drawn by the whisper of a story. Among these wanderers was a man named Lucas Bennett. He wasn't looking for adventure, nor did he have any romantic notions about restoring an old house. He was a man at a crossroads in life, desperate and willing to try anything. Having recently lost his job in the city, Lucas was at his wits' end, burdened by mounting debts and no clear path ahead. He had no family to lean on, no savings to speak of, and his dreams of a successful career seemed more distant with every passing day. Yet, as fate would have it, Lucas stumbled upon the farmhouse, a place that would change his life forever. It wasn't the house itself that caught his eye at first, it was the land. The farmhouse sat on a large plot of land, stretching out into the wilderness, surrounded by trees and fields that seemed to go on forever. Lucas had grown up in the city, never really understanding the appeal of the countryside. But with nothing left to lose, he found himself standing in front of the abandoned farmhouse one crisp autumn afternoon, gazing at the forgotten land and wondering if this could be the opportunity he so desperately needed. As he approached the house, his heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. He had heard rumors from the locals in Elmswood about the place. Stories of hidden treasures, whispered rumors of valuable relics tucked away in the creaking walls, left behind by the original owners. But Lucas was skeptical. He had always been a practical man, grounded in reality, unwilling to believe in the fanciful tales that others clung to. Yet something about the house called to him. Maybe it was the sense of history, or maybe it was the desperation in his own life that made him willing to entertain the possibility of finding something, anything, that could turn things around. Walking through the rusted gate, Lucas took in the full scope of the place. The paint was peeling from the farmhouse's once white exterior, and the barn behind it was nothing more than a skeleton of its former self. But there was something undeniably captivating about the way the sun hit the house, casting long shadows across the yard. It felt like an old story waiting to be told, a mystery to be uncovered. He stood there for a moment, feeling the cool breeze against his skin, wondering what his next steps should be. Then, on a whim, he pushed open the gate and made his way toward the front door. The heavy thud of his boots against the cracked porch echoed in the otherwise silent air. It was as if the world itself had forgotten this place, leaving it suspended in time. But Lucas wasn't one to turn back easily. With a final deep breath, he pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting ghostly beams of light across the room. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight, and Lucas couldn't help but feel like he was trespassing on something sacred. The walls, adorned with peeling wallpaper and old photographs that had long since faded, seemed to whisper of a bygone era. As he moved deeper into the house, his mind began to race. What had happened here? Why had the house been abandoned? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. The stories he had heard in Elmswood started to play over in his mind. whispers of hidden riches, of valuable antiques stashed in forgotten corners, waiting to be uncovered. It seemed like a long shot, but Lucas had nothing left to lose. He continued to explore, his footsteps soft against the creaking floors. Every room he entered was like a snapshot from the past, frozen in time. It was as if the family that had once lived here had simply walked out one day, leaving everything behind. He found old furniture, covered in dust, and personal items that seemed oddly intimate, like a glimpse into the lives of people long gone. It was both unsettling and strangely beautiful. Then, in the farthest room, at the back of the house, Lucas discovered something that caught his attention. A small, wooden chest, partially hidden beneath a pile of old rugs. His pulse quickened. Could this be the treasure he had heard about? He hesitated for a moment, torn between caution and curiosity. The chest, although old and worn, looked sturdy enough, as if it had been placed there for safekeeping. He knelt down, dusting off the surface, and slowly opened the chest. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, no precious relics gleaming in the dim light. Instead, Lucas found something even more intriguing, an assortment of old coins, their edges worn from years of being handled. They were tarnished, but even in their faded state, they exuded an undeniable value. Lucas ran his fingers over them, a mix of awe and disbelief filling him. These weren't just any coins, they were rare, antique pieces, each with intricate designs that spoke of a time long gone. As he examined them closer, Lucas realized that the chest was more than just a relic of the past. It was a key to something much bigger, something he hadn't even begun to understand. What was this hidden history? Why had these coins been left behind, hidden away in this forgotten corner of the farmhouse? Lucas didn't know the answers, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. With the chest in his hands, he stood up and gazed around the room, the weight of the coins in his palms a tangible reminder that, sometimes, fate finds a way of leading us exactly where we need to be. And in that moment, Lucas realized that his search for something to turn his life around had led him to this very spot, in the midst of an old, abandoned farmhouse. Little did he know that the true value of what he had found was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous had just occurred. The chest, now sitting in his hands, felt heavy with the weight of history. The coins inside were not just items of value. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Lucas felt an undeniable pull to uncover the story they told. He had no idea what he had stumbled upon, but his mind raced with possibilities. Could these coins be worth thousands of dollars? Were they part of a lost treasure? The questions flooded his thoughts as he carefully placed the chest back on the dusty floor and began to study the coins more closely. There were several in the chest, each one a different size, shape, and design. Some were made of gold, others of silver, but all were remarkably old, worn from years of being handled. The intricate designs on the coins were unlike anything Lucas had seen before. They depicted strange symbols, ancient figures, and even scenes from long-forgotten battles. The more he examined them, the more he realized that they weren't just valuable. They were rare, potentially priceless artifacts, and they had been hidden here, in this abandoned farmhouse, for reasons Lucas couldn't yet understand. His heart pounded as he realized that these coins could be the key to something much larger than he had imagined. If they were truly as valuable as he suspected, they could change his life in ways he had only ever dreamed of. But Lucas wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. He needed answers. He had to know the full extent of what he had found, and the only way to do that was to dig deeper. He carefully closed the chest, tucking it under his arm, and left the farmhouse. The sky had begun to darken, and the air was growing cooler, signaling the approach of nightfall. Lucas felt a strange sense of urgency, as if he had just unlocked a door to something he was not yet prepared for. His footsteps echoed in the quiet evening air as he made his way to his car, the chest still cradled carefully in his arms. The drive back to Elmswood was a blur. Lucas's mind was consumed with thoughts of the coins. He passed through the small town, its sleepy streets lit by the fading light of dusk, but he barely registered the familiar sights. His focus was entirely on the chest sitting beside him in the passenger seat. What should he do next? Should he tell someone about the coins? Or should he keep them to himself, investigate further, and see where this strange discovery might lead? By the time he arrived home, it was late. Lucas lived in a modest apartment above a small cafe on the edge of town. It was a simple place, not much to look at, but it was his home. He had spent many long nights here, alone, wrestling with his thoughts and uncertainties. Tonight, however, felt different. He felt a strange sense of excitement coursing through his veins, a rush of adrenaline that was hard to ignore. He had found something valuable, and it was up to him to figure out what to do with it. Inside, he set the chest on the small table in his living room and carefully opened it again. The coins lay inside, glinting faintly in the dim light of his apartment. Lucas's breath caught as he reached for one of them, holding it up to the light. The intricate engravings on the surface shimmered, and he could feel the history behind them, as if they were calling out to him. He knew he couldn't keep them to himself for long. He needed to know what they were worth, and more importantly, he needed to understand their significance. He had heard stories growing up about hidden treasures, lost artifacts, and mysterious discoveries, but he had never imagined that he would find himself in the middle of one of those tales. Lucas decided to visit the local antique dealer, a man named Harold Granger, who had been in business for as long as anyone in town could remember. Harold was known for his vast knowledge of rare antiques and collectible, and Lucas was certain he could shed some light on the coins. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, Lucas made his way to Harold's shop, a small, cluttered building on the main street of Elmswood. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and leather filled his nostrils. The shop was a treasure trove of all things vintage. Antique furniture, paintings, books, and trinkets piled high in every corner. The walls were lined with shelves filled with objects from every era, each one with its own story to tell. Harold, an older man, with a thick gray beard and round spectacles, looked up from behind the counter as Lucas entered. "Well, well," Harold said, adjusting his glasses. "What can I do for you today, Lucas?" "I need your expertise," Lucas said, his voice a little unsteady. "I found something unusual. I need to know if it's worth anything." Harold raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Unusual, you say? What kind of something?" Without saying a word, Lucas placed the chest on the counter and opened it, revealing the coins inside. Harold's eyes widened as he gazed at the collection, his fingers reaching out to examine them one by one. He turned each coin over in his hands, his brow furrowing as he studied the intricate designs. "Well, I'll be," Harold muttered under his breath. "These are something else. These aren't just old coins, Lucas. These are rare, and I mean rare. I've never seen anything quite like them." Lucas felt his heart race. "So they're worth something?" "Oh, they're worth something, all right," Harold said, his voice tinged with awe. "These coins are from a very specific period in history. Some of them date back to the early 1800s, while others are even older. They were part of a private collection, owned by a man who disappeared under mysterious circumstances over a century ago. His name was Gregory Hawthorne, and he was rumored to have been involved in some rather shady dealings. Harold paused, his eyes locking onto Lucas's. If what I'm seeing is correct, these coins could be worth thousands, maybe even more. But the real question is, why are they here, in an abandoned farmhouse? And why were they hidden away like this? Lucas's mind spun. The name Gregory Hawthorne rang a bell. He had heard it mentioned in passing over the years in stories about the town's mysterious past, but he had never really paid much attention. Now he realized that the coins were connected to something far bigger than he had anticipated. He had uncovered a piece of history, one that had been hidden for a reason. "What do you suggest I do with them?" Lucas asked, his voice shaky with the weight of what he was learning. Harold looked at him seriously. "You need to be careful. People will want these coins, Lucas. There are those who would stop at nothing to get their hands on them. I'd suggest you keep them close and proceed cautiously. You're not just dealing with a financial windfall here. You might be stepping into a story much darker than you ever imagined." Lucas left Harold's shop that afternoon with more questions than answers. His discovery had set something in motion, a chain of events that would pull him deeper into the mystery of the coins and their connection to Gregory Hawthorne. But for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like he had a purpose. The farmhouse, the chest, the coins, they were all pieces of a much larger puzzle, and Lucas was determined to uncover the truth no matter what it cost. The days following his visit to Harold's shop were filled with restlessness. Lucas couldn't focus on anything else. The coins, the strange history behind them, and the cryptic warnings Harold had given him. What was it about Gregory Hawthorne that made the man disappear without a trace? And why were his coins hidden in that old farmhouse, waiting for Lucas to find them? There were too many questions swirling around in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something much bigger than himself. The more he thought about it, the more the town of Elmswood seemed to hold the key. There were rumors, of course, as there always were in small towns. Stories passed down through generations, whispered in hushed tones at the local diner or the pub. But these weren't just stories. Lucas had always considered them folklore, nothing more than the product of bored minds looking to make something out of nothing. But now, with the coins in his possession, he couldn't ignore the possibility that these tales might hold a shred of truth. Determined to dig deeper, Lucas started his own investigation. He spent hours combing through the local library, searching through old newspapers and town records. The stories about Gregory Hawthorne were sparse, but they were enough to give him a glimpse into the kind of man Hawthorne had been. A wealthy landowner in the early 1800s, Hawthorne was known for his vast fortune, his penchant for secrecy, and his connections to mysterious individuals. There were rumors of unsavory dealings, of a man who would do anything to protect his wealth and power. But one thing was clear: Hawthorne had vanished without a trace, and no one knew what had become of him. The more Lucas uncovered, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Hawthorne had lived on a sprawling estate just outside of Elmswood, not far from the farmhouse where Lucas had found the coins. According to some of the older records, Hawthorne's estate had been abandoned around the same time he disappeared, leaving behind a fortune in both land and artifacts. The coins were just a small part of that fortune, an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. But Lucas couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was something significant about the way they had been hidden, tucked away in the farmhouse like a secret waiting to be uncovered. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas became more and more obsessed with the mystery. He couldn't let go of the idea that the coins were connected to something dark and dangerous. He had no idea why they had been hidden away, or why Gregory Hawthorne had chosen to disappear. But the more he investigated, the more it felt like there was someone, or something, out there watching him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that eyes were on him, lurking just beyond his vision. One evening, as he was leaving the library, Lucas caught sight of something strange. He had parked his car on the street in front of the library, and as he walked towards it, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows at the edge of the parking lot. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, and stood motionless as if waiting for something, or someone. Lucas's heart raced as he quickened his pace, a chill running down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was watching him. As he reached his car, the figure disappeared into the night, melting into the darkness like a shadow. Lucas looked around, but there was no sign of anyone else. He couldn't explain it, but something about the encounter felt ominous, like he had just brushed against something dangerous. But there was no time to dwell on it. He had to get home, to process everything he had learned. That night, Lucas locked himself in his apartment, his mind buzzing with questions. The figure in the parking lot, the coins, the strange history of Gregory Hawthorne. It all felt connected, but he couldn't see the whole picture. Yet he couldn't deny that the coins had power. There was something about them, something ancient, that had drawn him into this mystery. And now, it seemed, it was drawing others in as well. The next day, Lucas decided to take a risk. He needed more answers, and the only place left to look was the ruins of Gregory Hawthorne's estate. It had been abandoned for years, just like the farmhouse. But Lucas knew that if there were any answers to be found, they would be there. So, without hesitation, he packed a small bag with supplies, his camera, a flashlight, and some snacks, and set out to find the estate. It took him most of the day to reach the estate, and by the time he arrived, the sun was beginning to set. The air was cool and crisp, and the trees surrounding the estate were thick with autumn leaves, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The estate itself was a crumbling ruin, its once grand mansion now reduced to little more than a skeleton of its former self. Broken windows gaped like empty eyes, and the walls were covered in ivy, the bricks crumbling away with every gust of wind. But what caught Lucas's attention was the stone foundation. Something about it seemed different. As he walked around the perimeter of the estate, he noticed a section of the stone wall that had been disturbed. It wasn't obvious at first, but after a closer inspection he realized that someone, or something, had recently been digging here. The soil was fresh, the ground disturbed in a way that suggested something had been unearthed. His heart pounded as he knelt down, brushing aside the loose earth with his hands. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. A small, weathered chest, identical in size and shape to the one he had found in the farmhouse. His mind raced. Could this be another chest? Another hidden treasure? Was it possible that Gregory Hawthorne had hidden more than just coins? With trembling hands, Lucas pried open the chest, expecting to find more coins, more relics, but inside, he found something far more unexpected. A collection of old letters, faded photographs, and a journal. The journal, bound in leather and worn from age, caught his eye immediately. He opened it slowly, his fingers brushing against the brittle pages, and began to read. The journal belonged to Gregory Hawthorne himself. As Lucas read through the entries, he discovered that Hawthorne had been involved in secretive dealings with powerful people who were willing to go to any lengths to protect their interests. The journal detailed a hidden fortune, yes, but it also spoke of danger, of betrayal, and of a man who had been hunted by those who wanted to control everything he had built. The coins, it seemed, were just the beginning of something far more dangerous, something Lucas had now unknowingly become a part of. With every page he turned, the mystery deepened, and as Lucas closed the journal and stared out into the darkening sky, he realized that he wasn't just uncovering hidden treasures, he was uncovering a legacy of secrets, a web of lies, and a power struggle that had lasted for centuries. And somehow, he had become its latest player. As Lucas sat there, the journal in his hands, the weight of the discovery pressed heavily on him. Every word he read seemed to weave a deeper web of intrigue, pulling him into a history that was far more dangerous and convoluted than he could have imagined. Gregory Hawthorne's entries were cryptic, filled with references to people Lucas had never heard of, places he couldn't place on a map, and secrets that seemed to be buried beneath layers of deception. The journal spoke of something called the Eclipse Trust, a shadowy organization that had operated in the background for generations, amassing wealth, power, and influence. According to Hawthorne's writings, the Eclipse Trust was involved in the creation and distribution of rare artifacts, items that held power, not just in a monetary sense, but in ways that could shape history itself. The coins Lucas had found were just a small part of this collection, Hawthorne wrote, but they were important, a key to understanding a much larger puzzle. What intrigued Lucas even more were the warnings scattered throughout the journal. Hawthorne had known that his days were numbered. He had known that those who sought the treasures he had hidden would stop at nothing to get them. The last few pages were frantic, filled with paranoid ramblings about being followed, about enemies closing in on him. He had hidden his treasures well, he claimed, and he had left clues scattered throughout the estate and the farmhouse, hoping someone would eventually uncover them. But there was a sense of finality in his words, a feeling that he knew he wouldn't survive whatever was coming for him. Lucas couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine as he turned the final page. The last entry was cryptic, too cryptic. It seemed like a warning. The Eclipse Trust will find you. They always do. Trust no one. His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the final words. The Eclipse Trust. Was this the same group Harold had warned him about? The people who would stop at nothing to claim the coins. It seemed too much to be a coincidence. The more Lucas thought about it, the more he realized that his discovery of the farmhouse, the coins, and now this journal wasn't just random. He had been pulled into something much larger, something far more dangerous than he could have anticipated. Panic began to rise in him. He had always thought of his life as ordinary, unremarkable even. But now, everything had changed. What had once seemed like a lucky break, a simple discovery that might help him turn his life around, had turned into a nightmare. Someone was watching him, and those coins were no longer just a piece of history. They were a prize, and there were people out there who would do anything to get their hands on them. Lucas knew he had to leave, but even as the thought crossed his mind, he felt something shift in the air, a subtle pressure like the quiet before a storm. It wasn't just the journal that made him uneasy. He could feel it, the sense that he was being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind him, but the estate was still empty, save for the trees swaying in the wind and the crumbling remains of the mansion. Yet the feeling lingered, gnawing at him. It wasn't until he stood up to leave that he noticed it. The faint sound of footsteps crunching on the leaves. He froze, listening, trying to pinpoint where they were coming from. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Lucas spun around but saw nothing. The wind howled through the trees, masking any other sounds. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a shadow darting behind a ruined pillar of the mansion. It was quick, too quick, like something or someone was moving with purpose. He grabbed the journal and stuffed it into his bag, his heart racing as he backed toward his car. He couldn't explain what was happening, but he wasn't about to stick around to find out. With his hands shaking, he reached the door of his car, slid inside, and slammed it shut. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps as he fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine with a loud roar. As he sped away from the estate, He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following him. The rearview mirror showed nothing but empty road, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and the adrenaline coursed through his veins like fire. He couldn't ignore it. Someone had been in the shadows watching him, but who and why? By the time he reached Elmswood, the unsettling feeling hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had intensified. He wasn't sure who or what he was up against, but one thing was certain. He wasn't the only one searching for the truth. The Eclipse Trust, whoever they were, knew about the coins, and now they knew about him. He needed to be smarter. He couldn't let anyone know what he had discovered. Not Harold, not even his closest friends, if he had any left after everything that had happened. The journal had made it clear, trust no one. And yet Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to something. The puzzle was almost complete, but the more pieces he uncovered, the more dangerous the game became. That night, after a restless sleep filled with dark dreams, Lucas found himself back at the farmhouse. He had returned not because he felt safe there. He hadn't felt safe anywhere in weeks, but because it was the one place he could think clearly. There was something about the isolation of the farmhouse that allowed him to focus, to think, and to plan. He sat in the room where he had first discovered the chest, the room now darkened by the setting sun, and spread out the journal and the coins before him. The pages of the journal were beginning to fall apart, but Lucas could still make out the key details. There were more clues hidden in the farmhouse, and the chest had only been the beginning. The journal mentioned a series of markings hidden in the house, symbols that had been placed in various spots, symbols that Lucas now recognized as related to the Eclipse Trust. His mind raced as he recalled the strange drawings on some of the coins, symbols that matched the ones in the journal. Could these symbols be the key to finding the next piece of the puzzle? Could they lead him to whatever Gregory Hawthorne had hidden? If he followed the trail, could he find the rest of the treasure before anyone else? But the thought of others getting to it first made his stomach churn. The Eclipse Trust wasn't just a collection of people who wanted to profit off of artifacts. They were powerful, ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Lucas knew one thing for sure. The stakes had just become much higher. The next step in this journey could mean the difference between life and death, and he was about to dive deeper into the mystery than he ever thought he would. But even as he made his decision to move forward, one question lingered in his mind. How far was he willing to go to uncover the truth? The decision to continue down this dark, twisting path weighed heavily on Lucas's shoulders. Every clue he uncovered, every secret he peeled back, seemed to lead him further into the unknown, further away from the life he once knew. The farmhouses, the journal, the coins, they were all just pieces of a much larger puzzle. But it wasn't just about treasure anymore. It was about survival. The Eclipse Trust had already shown its hand, and it was clear they would do whatever it took to stop him from uncovering the truth. And now, with every step he took, they were getting closer. He spent the next few days poring over the journal again, retracing his steps through the farmhouse and analyzing every scrap of information he had. He realized something that made his blood run cold. The symbols on the coins weren't just decorative or random markings. They were coordinates. Coordinates that pointed to a hidden location. But not just any location. It was a place described in the final entries of Gregory Hawthorne's journal, a place that, if Lucas was right, held the key to the ultimate treasure, the true fortune of Gregory Hawthorne. It wasn't far from Elmswood, Lucas knew, a place deep in the woods, hidden away from the world. But as he read, he saw the faint outline of another chilling detail. Hawthorne had written about a place called the Vault of Shadows, a hidden chamber within the estate where all his treasures had been stored. The vault was not just a physical space. It was also a metaphor for the secrets Hawthorne had kept locked away, secrets that the Eclipse Trust was willing to kill for. The final paragraph of the journal was the most haunting. "They are coming for you, and they will never stop. You must never trust anyone, not even those closest to you. If you want to survive, find the vault before they do, and never, ever let them know you have found it." Lucas knew what he had to do. That night, with the journal and the chest of coins safely tucked into his bag, he set out for the woods. The moon was barely visible behind a veil of clouds, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Lucas moved quickly, his heart thundering in his chest as he navigated the dense forest. He had a map drawn from the coordinates in the journal, and though it wasn't exact, it pointed him in the right direction. He couldn't afford to waste time. Every minute he spent out here brought him closer to the danger that was already tracking him. The deeper he ventured into the woods, the more he began to feel the weight of the place. It was ancient, untamed, and oppressive. Every snap of a twig underfoot made his pulse spike. Every rustle in the trees made him spin around, convinced that someone or something was watching him. But there was no time for fear. He had to keep moving. After what felt like hours, Lucas finally reached the clearing described in the journal. It was nothing like he expected. Instead of a grand vault or treasure chest, there was a stone altar, weathered and ancient, sitting in the center of the clearing. It looked like an old sacrificial site, long abandoned, but the symbols etched into the stone were the same as the ones he had seen on the coins. They matched perfectly, indicating that he had found the right place. But where was the vault? Where was the treasure? With a trembling hand, Lucas traced the symbols on the altar, trying to decipher their meaning. That's when he noticed it. A small, hidden compartment at the base of the stone. He pressed against it, and with a low rumble, the stone shifted, revealing a narrow passage beneath the altar. His heart leapt. This was it. He crawled through the passage, his hands scraping against the cold stone walls as he moved deeper underground. The passage was tight, claustrophobic, and the air grew stale with every passing moment. But Lucas pushed forward. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Finally, he reached the end of the passage. What he found there took his breath away. The Vault of Shadows wasn't just a chamber. It was a hidden underground museum of sorts. The walls were lined with ancient artifacts, gold coins, priceless works of art, and documents that had been carefully stored for centuries. But the most remarkable thing was the central display. There, in the middle of the room, was a large glass case containing what appeared to be a single object, a gleaming, ornate medallion the size of a fist. Its surface was intricately engraved with more of the same symbols he had seen throughout the journal and on the coins. This was it, the true treasure of Gregory Hawthorne. Lucas stepped forward, unable to take his eyes off the medallion, but as his hand reached for it, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the stone hallway behind him. He spun around, his blood running cold. He wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted in the dim light. Lucas's heart stopped. It was Harold Granger, the antique dealer, the man who had been so helpful, so seemingly trustworthy. But now, as Harold stepped into the chamber, there was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. "So, you found it," Harold said, his voice low and smooth. "I was wondering how long it would take. I hoped it wouldn't be you, Lucas, but I should have known. You were always more clever than you let on." Lucas's mind raced. Harold had been involved with the Eclipse Trust all along. He had been using him, feeding him just enough information to keep him going. And now, it seemed, he had come to claim the treasure for himself. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lucas said, backing away from the medallion. "I'm not giving you anything." Harold smiled, the coldness in his expression never wavering. "You misunderstand. I don't need you to give me anything. I only need you to get out of the way." In the blink of an eye, Harold lunged at him, and Lucas barely had time to react. The medallion, with its ancient engraved symbols, was no longer just a piece of treasure. It was a key to something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. With every ounce of strength, Lucas fought back, knocking the medallion from its pedestal and sending it crashing to the ground. As it hit the stone floor, something inside the vault seemed to shift. The ground trembled beneath them, and a low, ominous rumble echoed through the chamber. Harold cursed, realizing too late what Lucas had done. The vault was beginning to collapse, the very walls of the chamber shaking violently. Lucas didn't wait to see what would happen next. He grabbed the chest of coins, stuffed the journal into his bag, and ran. The entrance to the passageway was closing in on him as rocks and debris began to fall from the ceiling. But Lucas didn't look back. He was only focused on one thing: escaping with his life. He made it out just in time, the vault collapsing behind him in a cloud of dust and debris. The medallion, the treasure, everything inside was lost forever. But Lucas had survived. Back in Elmswood, Lucas walked away from the ruins of Gregory Hawthorne's legacy, forever changed by what he had uncovered. He had come looking for answers, but what he had found was something far darker than he had ever imagined. The Eclipse Trust was real, and their reach was far longer than he had ever believed. But in the end, Lucas had walked away from the treasure, and that decision had made all the difference. Sometimes, the greatest discovery is realizing that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Lucas knew now that the price of knowledge was far too high, and he was ready to leave the past behind and move forward, with the weight of the journal, the coins, and the secrets they held, buried deep inside him.